Yes. Update. Trial date has been set. 4/8/2022. On that day may the scythe of Damocles make its mark. For that is the day that Islam Saeed Natsa will be hauled before the court to answer for his crimes against me. As we await that glorious day, let us amuse ourselves by reviewing some of the highlights of his federal terrorism conviction proceedings. The proceedings that saw him found guilty in federal court of an international conspiracy and a plot to travel overseas and fight for ISIS. And let me take this moment to point out that the terrorist knife man was actually born in this country, despite being of Palestinian extract. Thereby, we can't just get rid of him by exile. Although, given his record of ill behavior, one might imagine that an execution awaits him in his future. Let's jump ahead. We'll start at what should have been the end of the line for this terrorist scum, the sentencing hearing. Let the loving and liberal mollycoddling begin. Here, the judge says, I have reviewed the defense's memorandum, including letters from Mr. Natsa's younger sister, father, friends, co-worker, clerical, individual, and aunt and uncle. Well, isn't that comforting? A literal den of sympathizers. Our starting point is always the advisory sentencing guidelines, which as a result of the terrorist enhancement, results in a guideline calculation. Skipping ahead. Had Mr. Natsa made it to Syria, and then further radicalized and being a citizen, and come back, we don't know what would have happened. He might have been disillusioned, however, he also might have come back and been a danger to the United States. So I understand the argument. So while the government has not presented any evidence to the court that he was obtaining military training in the United States, that he had attempted to purchase any weapons here, as the PSR reflects, there was some discussion about whether or not an act, they mean a terrorist act, should be committed in the United States. I understand that, but I guess my point was that when I'm looking at comparables, it appears from the spectrum of activity that in the world of an effort to join a terrorist organization or participate with a terrorist, or a charge of that nature, but to the extent that this defendant was attempting to travel with a travel companion, where he had purchased the tickets for this other person, who was a juvenile, where they had had discussions about the trip, where he had communicated with others about traveling and joining ISIL. There's no indication that he recruited that individual, right? In fact, that individual didn't show up, as I understand it, but he's coordinating the travel. At least it didn't seem to be a suggestion that he had actively recruited this minor participant. So I'm not going so far as saying whose idea it was to travel. Certainly the juvenile presumably intended on traveling, but was unable to complete his travel, which is why he didn't show up at the airport. But nevertheless, Mr. Natsa is the one who purchased the ticket and who took all of the preparatory steps to obtain a credit card for the purposes of buying the 2 round-trip tickets, so the plan was hatched several weeks ahead of time. There had been communications over a period of months, of course. He had been communicating with someone in another country about committing the travel, where literally you have a person who decided to join ISIL and went to the airport and attempted to travel. There was ongoing discussion here over a period of months. There was again attempt to travel with another individual, plans that had been made with a female in another country. You had indicated in some of the record that there was an actual discussion about engaging in activity in the United States. Can you point that out or direct me to that? And it's communication that this paragraph actually refers to his post-arrest statement, in which he makes reference to it. Admitted that 1 year prior, he thought about conducting an attack inside of the United States. Is that what you're referring? Miss Becker? Yes, Your Honor. My God, this is the type of scum we've got in this country now. There was discussion with the minor with whom he was going to travel as well. Then, when it was determined that he was unable to travel, he asked whether or not he should do something. The minor should commit something in the United States, and Mr. Natsa had said, don't do anything here, just try to travel to Syria. Moving on, the judge goes on to mention happenings in the great state of Minnesota, the state from which the Swedes that I love hail. There's a district court in Minnesota and Minneapolis that has had a number of cases related to Somalians who have been recruited to participate in terrorist type of activities. The district court judge there took a particular interest in this topic and wanted to try to nip it in the bud because they had such a large Somalian population. Oh, that's so wonderful. Yes, they posted pictures of themselves with guns, and yes, they posted pictures of themselves doing certain things. But they were doing so as we are freedom fighters, and we are trying to help our brothers with fighting in arms in Syria. But as Mrs. Becker directed me to realize, there are some aspects of that statement that indicates that Mr. Natsa backed off from it, and then also encouraged the minor individual we discussed not to engage in any activities, but at one point he considered engaging in violent conduct in this country. And then made the correct decision, said the defense. Well, true, Miss Mitchell, said the judge, but that's a sign of, he specifically told the juvenile, do not do anything here in the United States. But to some extent, your point that the motivation here is entirely focused on, you said something to the effect of the humanitarian aspects of this. I don't think I can characterize it in that fashion. Miss Mitchell, I wouldn't say wholly, but it was. The defense attorney fails in trying to foist the lie upon the court that Mr. Natsa and his underage companion were only intending to participate in humanitarian activities. Cunt. The judge then points out that Natsa could have well returned to the United States and posed a significant danger. So in other words, yes, in terms of looking at some of the comparables, he's in the group that didn't get very far. But shouldn't I take into account the prospect he could represent a very serious danger to the United States? The court can take that into consideration, says the defense attorney. But the court can also take into consideration that Mr. Natsa could have gotten to Turkey and decided to come back, or he could have gotten to Syria, the border, and decided to come back. The judge scoffs. Should I make all of the inferences in his favor? The defense. I don't think that the court has to make any inferences one way or another. Miss Becker speaks. Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to address a few of the issues that both the court and Miss Mitchell raised with respect to propaganda. While it does seem clear that Mr. Natsa did accomplish some propaganda, it's important to know the type of propaganda that he was following and reposting and sharing with others. That of the caged Jordanian pilot who was burned alive. That's the propaganda he was following. Not a Nike ad with ISIL or a Snickers ad with ISIL. He was interested in the most brutal of propaganda. I would also disagree with the idea that the defendant was apprehended early in the game. He was apprehended at the very end of the game. He was arrested as he was about to board his plane. There was nothing left for him to do to complete the act other than to get there. Every other aspect of material support was committed. You don't have to train in the United States prior to leaving in order to commit an act of terrorism elsewhere. He was intending on fighting there, regardless of whether or not he learned how to do so here or he learned how to do so there. He was actually arrested at the very last step. But as Miss Mitchell was commenting on Mr. Natsa's preparation, this was not an impulsive act on his part whatsoever. He had expressed for months an interest in ISIL. He was interviewed by law enforcement authorities, at which time he had been communicating for months about his intention to join ISIL. He obviously had already been radicalized and had been communicating with a minor about committing acts overseas. He did open up a new line of credit to purchase a ticket, and he emptied his bank account prior to leaving. So this was a concerted plan, again, not just showing up at the airport and decided to go for the day. So Miss Mitchell has obviously pointed out sentences that are at the low end. Right as rain, I'd like to keep these segments under 10 minutes in length. So we'll end this here. In the next segment pertaining to this sentencing hearing of the convicted terrorist who repeatedly stabbed me in the back in the middle of the night in San Francisco's worst ghetto, Islam Saeed Natsa speaks before the court. Islam Saeed. Islam Saeed. Islam Saeed. Islam Saeed Natsa.